Hi, everybody. I think you're our favorite people because you chose to be here with us today talking about food, because we're really passionate about food. And I will start by introducing our team up here on the stage. So I'm Lara Seaver. I'm the director of touring for Reverb. So I work with many of our tour partners to develop sustainability plans and implement them on the road. And then we have Mary McCarthy from Levy. And you have a mic, Mary?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm the Vice President of Sustainability for Levy. If you're not familiar with Levy, we are a food and beverage service provider for a lot of the venues that we'll be talking about today.
Awesome. And Leslie Olnick from Live Nation.
Hi, I'm Leslie. I'm a global tour promoter, and I work with Billie Eilish and Phineas.
I am Maggie Baird. I am the founder of Support+Feed and the mother of Billie Eilish and Phineas.
And Stephanie Lynch.
And I'm Steph, and I will say I'm of the 77% of the population that gets nervous about public speaking, so hi. I work for a nonprofit called Greener by Default. We use human behavioral science strategies to nudge people towards more plant-based foods.
Thank you for being here. And we know that plant-based food is an important climate solution, and it's also an underappreciated one and an under-recognized one. And an underutilized one, so it has a lot of opportunity. I'd love to start if you could each just give me a quick version of your why. Why the plant-based food, why it matters to you, why it's one of the things that you're most passionate about and ended up on stage talking about today. And Stephanie, will you start?
Because we all eat. We eat every day, and it's one of the biggest things that we can do to decrease our emissions.
93% of climate conversations do not mention food. And yet food is one of the most accessible strategies that we all have every day, that food impacts not only our human health, but the health of our neighbors. Climate change affects our neighbors disproportionately, and we who have the privilege, and I'm going to assume everybody in this room has enough privilege if they showed up here today, we can determine not only our own health, but we can support our neighbors in how we eat and how we provide food at all of our events.
Why not? I mean, I think that, like Maggie said, we should all be able to have equal access to delicious food, plant-based food. If we can help change someone's perspective on plant-based food and how that can impact the environment, then why not?
Just to put a little context to it, globally, the food and agriculture system is responsible for about a quarter of greenhouse gas emissions. So we have a huge role to play, and the solutions exist. These aren't technologies that we're waiting to be innovated. They exist today, plant-based food, working with our farmers to adopt more sustainable food practices, reduction in food waste. These are all really big opportunities to address that footprint. As a company, we have a commitment to be net zero, and 98% of our emissions that we're responsible for come from our supply chain, from the food and beverage that we purchase. And transitioning to plant-based options is one of the most impactful solutions we have to achieve that.
Thank you. I think it's important to note that we've talked about three different sort of silos or pillars of where food impact happens. You talked about the really important sourcing and what is served. There's also the how it's served and the products that are used, the plastic especially, and then the waste stream and waste management and food donation opportunities and all of that. And I think I just want to take a moment to say that we will have a Q&A part of this conversation after, so definitely be thinking about what you're curious about and what impacts you and the influence that you have in your sphere. And then I'd love to start talking about some of our successes to start. Leslie, would you address the story of the O2 in case anyone hasn't heard it yet? Because I think it's almost legendary now, but a really great example.
Well, the O2 on Billie Eilish's last tour went fully plant-based, which is incredible. That's a huge ask for a venue of that size. I haven't heard any other venue do that prior to
6 shows.
6 shows, yes. And if you think about that, 18,000 people per show, that's a ton of people, a ton of food waste that we're able to combat. And really, they're raising the bar for other arenas and venues, stadiums, venues of all sizes to do the same. It's not that difficult, and it shouldn't just be on the responsibility of Billie and other artists to do that. I think promoters, venues, different food organizations, everyone needs to come together and make those changes. So that was an incredible feat, for sure.
If I can add too, what's amazing about that O2 story is it was at the prompting of the Billie Eilish tour that the O2 made that change. Levy does the food there, but it stuck, right? So they made a change based on this 6-show run, and beef never went back on the menu at the O2, right? So it's an incredible opportunity for us as a food and beverage provider to be able to experiment, right, in more supportive conditions. The folks coming to Billie's show understand the value of those changes that they're making, and then it builds our operators' confidence that they can make those changes without some of these trade-offs around business success.
And I think what's exciting about that is it's one opportunity to really showcase what can be done on a large scale. And I think one of the other really exciting stories I've heard from this team is Stephanie's story about the Balance Burger, and that almost attacks it from a different angle of making a really universally accepted opportunity that can be pervasive throughout many, many platforms. So Stephanie, would you tell us about the Balance Burger?
Yeah, so what we do at Greener by Default is we use strategies that still allow people the freedom of choice to have meat if they want. We're just creating the infrastructure that nudges people towards more plant-based foods to begin with. So Balance Burgers, and we have a really awesome partnership with Mary right now. Balance Burgers, for people who don't know, are burger patties that replace a percentage of the beef with another product, like usually it's mushrooms, and like there's a great company that does upcycled shiitake stems, and like so they do 30 to 50% usually of the burger is replaced with mushrooms usually, and they're called balanced proteins. And it's a really awesome opportunity to do meat reduction without taking away people's desire to have meat, but it has dramatic implications. I'm going to pull up my stats in a minute because I wrote them all down for this. But we're working with Mary on a pilot a study that we're doing to see what that looks like, and just I think I have it in my brain. The implications are over 1.8 million miles driven just by switching out 30% of a beef burger for mushrooms in a medium-sized venue at an arena. And every time they open their doors, they're selling thousands and thousands of burgers. And if in 1 year you can reduce 1.8 million miles driven just by changing a recipe. Right. And to put it in perspective, I could go off on Balanced Burgers for all day, sorry. So if you want to talk to me later about it, please confide in me. But Balanced Burgers rate higher in taste studies and with diner satisfaction than 100% beef burgers. So you're actually replacing it, adding value, and decreasing carbon emissions dramatically. It's a no-brainer. Everyone should be doing it.
I think, Maggie, you've talked a bit about sort of the other side, the struggles or the number of times you get met with, with trying to change people's thinking around sustainability in general, but specifically around food. Would you talk about maybe some of those challenges or things that you hear and any strategies that we can all think about when we get pushback?
Yeah, let me just start by talking about what Support+Feed does, because our mission is to address food equity and the climate crisis. And really our mission is involved around the intersectionality, that there's no reason that we should be siloing our issues. Why should we be feeding millions of people in food assistance programs without making that food the most climate-friendly food it can be, without making that food the healthiest food it can be, without supporting our small local economy, et cetera? So that's what Support+Feed does as a mission, is deliver nourishing plant-based meals to community orgs, particularly in food apartheids, along with information and education. And then we take that a step further with our education outwardly towards fans. So we may be on a tour with an artist like Billy or Phineas or Paramore or Metallica or Coldplay, and meeting fans to explain to them that when they make the choice to eat one fully plant-based meal a day for 30 days, 10,000 people in arena save 7 million gallons of water. So trying to get people to understand how their personal impact adds up. We carry that further, of course, in Billy's tours. So on Billy's tours, we work with Live Nation and Reverb and our production team to get the arenas to have more plant-based food offered toward fans. We also deal with that behind the scenes with our crew, and I think that's where the challenges come in. So with Support and Feed, we're feeding a nourishing, very delicious, high-quality plant-based meal to people. That comes from a restaurant, and there's many reasons. Partly it's to support those small businesses, but it's also because for many people it's the first time that they are knowingly eating a plant-based meal. They eat plant-based food all the time because people eat bananas and, whatever, but they're not knowingly thinking, oh, this is plant-based. So the food has to be beyond delicious, right? If you have bad catering and it includes animal products, people just think you have bad catering. But if you have bad catering and it's plant-based, that's all people can think about. So one of the strategies we tried on the 2022 tour, the 2020 tour for 3 shows before we all came home, was we had fully plant-based food for the entire crew. And we had an amazing catering company, Paul McCartney's catering company, Eat Your Hearts Out. They were incredible. And the food was like the best food. It was like being in a 5-star restaurant every single night. It was amazing. Like, no one could stop talking about the food backstage. And we managed to have that for the 2022 U.S. leg. I apologize if anyone ever hears this and gets offended, but when we went to Europe, we got the B team of the catering company because Paul McCartney went on tour and he got the A team. We got the B team, and the food was not so good. And suddenly, the bus drivers, plus it was Europe, so the bus drivers were not down. They were not happy about plant-based food at all, plus it kind of sucked. So, and again, it wasn't that it was plant-based, it just, they weren't, whatever. It wasn't great. So this was really rough. And then, the production team is like, the crew is, hates it. And it's easy for me to be, I'm like, they have days off. They have per diem, whatever. Okay, so that was at 2022. And then we went to some countries where literally we were told, you will not get a local crew if you don't offer meat. So we've had to kind of have all these balances of how do we make the most impact. We also don't want Billy's money to be spent on animal products. This is a climate stance. It's also for our family an ethical, moral stance. So it's not something we want to do. So on this tour, we had to compromise because in order to reduce our carbon footprint in other ways, we wanted to minimize one truck and one bus that would normally be used for traveling that catering company around, because you have to kind of think of every sort of impact you have. It took a whole bus, a whole truck, so we eliminated them, and then we went to local caterers. But also, the set is quite big, so we didn't have room for second caterers for the local crew. FYI, local crew unions usually require you to have a meat offering. So now we were like, oh gosh, okay, now we have to not only feed Billy's 100-person crew, we have to feed the local crew, and they require meat. Okay, so this is how we worked around it. We serve a meat option. It's in the main catering, but it's in a slightly separate area. Everything else is fully plant-based, but there is a meat option. That is paid for. I think Live Nation covers that, because we do not. But if I'm being completely honest, and I will be, I think it's been really successful because the crew is much happier. And, even though it kind of hurts my heart, I'm like, they're happier. They're eating a large number of plant-based food. Every other thing there is plant-based. So the impact is still there, but the buy-in is much higher. And so that has been a successful strategy. But, we have to really work extremely hard to make that food super delicious. We do provide signage from Support and Feed about the impact of what we eat to kind of give context to why we're doing it. We sent out a letter in advance, explained it. And by the way, I'm sorry I'm going on a long time, but it's kind of a big picture. We also on this tour I think we did something extremely rare. We offered health insurance stipends to all of our crew. So we pay for health insurance for our crew, and we also pay for a mental health program. And we also have massage therapists come and juice bars and all kinds of things. So we basically kind of added to the whole package. You're going to get this food, and you're also going to get all of this health benefits as well. So we really went a long way to try to increase the buy-in for the crew and support them in this journey.
And make it a positive
Make
experience.
it positive for everybody so that everybody would come out of it feeling really good.
We also added in some pop-ups into the catering
Oh,
with
yes.
local vegan restaurants and plant-based restaurants, which was really nice because it gave them an opportunity to be seen, amongst more people within the arena. It shined a light on their restaurant in town. It also mixed up the food for the crew. So we've had tons of great pop-ups within the catering, which is also very fun. And I
Yeah.
think that's opened eyes, everyone's eyes on the plant-based side who don't typically eat that way.
Yeah, that is so important. We've had 1 or 2 restaurants featured at every venue, local plant-based restaurants. And also, we did hire a consultant, Chad Sarno, who's a very well-known vegan chef. So we saved on the expense of having a truck and a bus. We also then provide jobs for local caterers, but we have this vegan chef who consults with the catering in advance for every city to make sure that they, have a really good balance and they're presenting really good food. That was really very helpful.
If I can, I want to build on one of Maggie's points, which I think is that when we're thinking about guest-facing service, which is primarily what Levy does, we have to be unwavering in our commitment to the quality of the plant-based options that we're providing. And one of the big things we've been working with our chefs on is, I think for a long time, if we're talking concessions in particular, they think Impossible Burgers, Impossible Hot Dogs, and yes, that will always be a solution in the same way we're excited about the balanced protein options. And we need to think much more holistically about what those plant-based options are that we're putting out there. We have the Moda Center in Portland has this great cauliflower shawarma bowl. That it's vegan by default, right? And then they can opt in to an additional animal protein. Now that is a picture of a plant-based menu presentation that I think excites fans and guests. But we have to think more holistically about what these options are. Impossible and Beyond Burger will always have a place on our menu because of the convenience of them, to be honest. But it has to be beyond that.
That makes sense, and I think we're hearing this repeated refrain of plant-forward choices for people and making sure that they still feel that ownership over their diet, but offering them so many solutions. And I know, Stephanie, you offer quite a few tips on buffet management and other things that I've even taken some of these strategies into my home and when I'm like a family reunion, making sure that it's the plant-based things first, with meat as sort of a side dish almost.
Yeah.
Would you share some more? Share some of the things that you
Sure.
tell people.
It makes me really happy to hear everyone's already said some of them up here. So, the biggest one, like Mary was talking about, is a plant-based default. So when you think about your menu engineering right now, we live in a very meat-focused society. But defaults are a really easy concept to apply to food. So when I say defaults, think about like your ringtone setting or your email, right? Those are settings that are there until you decide to change them. If we apply that to food-based systems, then it's like human behavioral science that people are lazy and they want the easiest solution, so they're more likely to just stick it out with the default, like to the tune of 80 to 95% of the time. And we do a lot of studies around this. So like Mary's example is a perfect one of just make it a vegan option by default, give people the opportunity to add in meat and dairy if they want to, and oftentimes they won't because it's a nutritious, delicious meal in and of itself. They're not going to change anything. And then to the buffet line, like Maggie was saying, it is one of our strategies to have meat on a separate buffet. Or if you're doing an RSVP'd event, that's like a very easy swap. Make it the plant-based meal by default. Have people opt in for a meat meal, right? Again, 95% of the time, people will just stick it out with a plant-based meal, and that has dramatic repercussions for carbon emission savings. And the one other thing, what you guys were talking about made me remember this. So I live on the east side of LA, and I went to the Irwindale Speedway closing ceremony. I don't know if anyone did that, but it's the worst environmental place there is. It's very bad for the environment, but they were closing down. It's been a cultural institution. Long story short, all of the food options except the concession stand ran out of food. And I went to the concession stand, obviously nothing vegan on the menu or vegetarian. And I asked them about the chili, and the lady was like, I've been here 9 years. Last week I had to go figure out what meat product was in the chili. It's soy protein, and I didn't know for 9 years. And like, I don't know, it's just like a perfect example also of like, if we're just doing it, or just making it happen, people are gonna eat it. And we make it good. People are going to eat it.
I cook for my dad with that same strategy all the time.
I think that education is such a huge part of this because, you know, that story, that the people had no idea what they were serving. And we find that even in the arenas, we've seen like some of the concessions that do have plant-based food either don't know that they do, or they are actively pitching the non-plant-based item because of their own preference, right? So they'll be like, you want the vegan dog? We've got the bratwurst, you know? Or even in catering, I've walked into catering and heard the nice person say, you know, here's the thing, and the salmon is over there, you know? And so you have to really get people on the team because they don't understand why you're doing it in the first place, and they really default themselves, unfortunately, to their own indoctrination about what people must have or must want.
I was going to ask, go ahead.
I was just going to say 75% of the population is flexitarian, right? So if they're eating vegetables anyway, so let's just make it easier for them to choose that over the meat.
Leslie, working with Live Nation, things are always happening so fast. That's one of the things we always hear in the music industry is that by the time you can have these strategic conversations about changing things, the show's happened. And so as things are happening, as these conversations are additive to some of the tech pieces that get discussed for putting on a show, what are some of your strategies to make sure sustainability in general, but specifically around food, don't get forgotten?
Yeah.
Because you do fantastic at it.
Oh, thank you. Well, Laura and I have worked really closely together, as well as Maggie and the Support+Feed team. And so part of my job as Billy's tour promoter and Phineas's is to map out, you know, the venues that we're going to play, the dates that we're going to play them, all the different territories around the world. And what I've done in the past and what's worked really well, and we're doing it even more so now on a different level, is as I'm having conversations with the venues, making sure they understand what's important to Billy and kind of what are the requirements to play the venue. So what are the expectations as far as being able to bring in your own water bottle? We're gonna have an eco-village. Fans will need to be able to refill their water there. We require 3 plant-based menu options at concessions. When I first started, it was 1, and that was,
And it was popcorn.
it was popcorn or chips. So now I say it cannot be popcorn, chips, side salad, pretzels. You know, so just giving them more specific examples, and then the next conversation will be, it can't just be a vegan hot dog or a vegan burger. Like, we need to provide healthy, delicious, creative options for people so they can have choices and, you know, have better nutritional options. So, you know, as part of my routing and planning and budgeting, these are all things that I take into consideration that I know are super important. And the venues are getting on board with it. They're very excited. They come back to me with, you know, all these different options. Oakview, Kristen's team has done an incredible job. It's almost like a competition, like who can come back with the best sustainable options for Billy. It's really amazing.
It is kind of a competition now.
Yeah, San Jose was one of the venues that went, I think, fully plant-based on this last leg. And we have some, you know, it's just incredible to see people make change not just for her show, but moving forward. And I think that's where we need to hold people accountable. Is it's great that you're implementing all these systems for her. We know they're super important to her, but we want them to be the path moving forward and the norm moving forward.
I think it's fantastic, and it also is really crucial to start those conversations early. It's not an add-on later. It's great if we can have those conversations at all before the show, but when you have that power of the early conversations at booking, it makes a difference. Mary, where do you feel the power lies for moving this forward, moving the plant-based movement forward in this music space?
Yeah, I have to say I've really appreciated the focus on culture at this conference so far. It feels kind of tonally different than a lot of the sustainability conferences that I attend, and I think it's reflective of the power of the music industry, and I think we just need to acknowledge that we're up against some pretty significant cultural headwinds, right? In the United States, beef equals value. The anecdote I always use to kind of demonstrate this is my brother-in-law. He's a salesperson. I live in Chicago. He's like your quintessential Midwest dude, and love him so much. And when he makes a big sale, he and his wife go out to a steak dinner, right? Like that's the connotation of value that we have culturally, and so we are trying to shift that. And there are influences like passionate artists that can help us change that narrative. There's also forces like policy change. There's a great example in New York that I can speak more about, where we're kind of getting incentivized to make these changes and maintain that value proposition, right? That's our challenge as a company. If someone is shelling out, in some cases, tens of thousands of dollars to attend one of these events, they want that high value proposition. And so we have to, and it's a challenge to our chefs to maintain that value proposition without it just being about, sticking a big piece of meat on the countertop. And one of the things that I've been encouraged by is our chefs actually love it. It's an opportunity for them to express their creativity in a business that otherwise kind of forces them to do the same thing over and over again. And so I think bigger picture, it's about that education like Maggie was talking about. I've worked in food and agriculture sustainability for my whole career, and I think we're about 10 years behind the energy system, realistically. Like, people just don't know as much about food and agriculture sustainability, and so as that education starts to shift, people become aware of this, and we get better at offering great plant-based options. I think that's when we start to see that broader shift, and we have to do it.
And Maggie, that ties exactly into the work that Support+Feed is doing, especially on the ground with fans and these communications and conversations. You mentioned the 30-day plant-based pledge. What do you and your team see on the ground at shows as you're having these conversations, both at Billy's shows, where there might be a little bit more awareness about Support+Feed, and also when you go to Metallica, which is a completely different audience for the most part?
Yeah, that's so interesting. I wanted to add that we did create plant maps. So Support+Feed, we publish on our social media the where you can find the plant-based food at every venue. That calls attention to it, because you got to get people to know where to go for it. It's not always super obvious. We also did a partnership with Google Maps, where Google Maps would show people Billy's favorite plant-based restaurants, which was basically all of them, in local areas, and how to, where they were in proximity to the arena, and how to get to the arena via public transportation, et cetera. So that was a project with Google Maps. Support+Feed, we also do plant-based food drives with a lot of artists at a lot of venues, and that's been with many artists. And that's part of our mission with Support+Feed, is because we really are supporting our local communities. And so when we can do a plant-based food drive at an arena, get that to a food bank or an organization in good proximity to that arena, it's like a community offset that the artist can do. I think we need to not just think carbon offset, we need to think community offset. How are we supporting these communities that are so impacted by the music industry? When we deal with fans, it's definitely different. Yeah, Billy's fans, they are on board. They want to know, they want to learn, they want to take the pledge. We have a film that shows before the show that shows all the sustainability measures we're doing on the tour, not just the food, everything we're doing, and then how can you be a part of that? And that we know from the Planet Reimagined study from Adam Met and AJR is that, people do respond to what their favorite artists care about, but even more if they know it's authentic for them and that they walk the walk. Interestingly, Metallica is a very long-standing philanthropic band, but they don't currently address climate too much. They address food, right? But they've always wanted to feed people. They do always feed people. So the great thing about Support and Feed is that sometimes a band is interested in having us a part of what they do because it's climate, sometimes it's food, sometimes it's small business. There's a lot of intersections that we can be a part of. They definitely are different. They're definitely fans who, have not one single perception of what you're talking about when you say a plant-based meal. And, you have to go like peanut butter and jelly sandwich, You have to start like really relatable. But I think we can say that there's learning, and there's always people at every fan, at every single artist, even the ones that are the least kind of aware, there's always some people who are aware. And they're always like, and that's the thing we kind of also forget about. We forget about in the conversation, because we're talking about climate, we're talking about all these things for the great reason, but having been a person who searched for something to eat at venues for my entire life, we forget that there are a lot of people out there who already eat this way for one reason or another. And we also have not been serving those people. As a person who ate a side salad and a dry baked potato for about 30 years, there are fans who were like, thank you. When we started Support and Feed, we were taking food, as many people were. Originally, we were also feeding first responders and frontline workers. And people were so grateful to get something that was nourishing and delicious and not a pizza, Or it could be a plant-based pizza, but you know what I mean? There was such a lack of understanding of that. And we have such a real indoctrination and prejudice with this. I remember seeing a comment that was like, don't our heroes deserve meat? But that's the kind of thinking that we're up against, this upbringing and this kind of, idea that the government has supported for so long, that there is this, healthy way to eat, which scientists absolutely have told us is not accurate. But, I don't know what the question was now. I just... Sorry.
Well, no, here's a follow-up, though. We have talked about a few different strategies around communication, definitely letting people know that these options are available beforehand in those know before you go emails that venues send out. But there are other incentives that we are piloting and trying, and ways to get the message, and other initiatives, like the one in New York City you mentioned. I'd love to hear about some of these useful strategies that we've found to be impactful.
Well, we had several venues who offered like a discount if well, go ahead, you talk about Leslie.
Not UBS, but the arena in Baltimore offered a voucher. If you use public transportation, they offered a food voucher at a vegan plant-based concession stand. So if you use public transportation, you could show proof of that and receive $20 off. So basically get your meal for free, which was pretty amazing. We also had a sponsor in Australia. This is more transportation focused, but Vodafone, they came on board, and we were able to provide free public transportation for everyone that attended Billy's shows, which was really incredible. So again, not specific to food, but supporting the climate crisis and offering transportation, which was a huge priority for us on this tour.
I think just making it really, really, really available and really easy to find. We are all, was the 20-second rule of happiness, right? If it's 5 to 20 seconds easier to do or hard to do, will determine whether you do it. I mean, you want to learn to play the guitar, take your guitar out of the closet in the case and put it next to the couch, where the remote control is. It's that kind of stuff. We have to make it convenient. It is the number one thing that makes a difference. Like it used to be at Dodger Stadium, to get a vegan hot dog, it was like one level and you had to go, and then it was like way over there, but now they're pretty much everywhere.
Yeah, another strategy that I think about is nothing. I'll frame this as a pet peeve, if that's okay, rather than being so positive, which is we put all of this effort into getting these items on the menu, and then you'll see it listed at the bottom, right? And you'll see it listed as plant-based whatever, right? And this is something Steph and I talk a lot about. We have to put the same love and attention into how we communicate these items on the menu as we would any other item in order for a guest to find them appealing. Like, of course, if I ask that all the time of our operators who say, you know, plant-based items just don't sell as well. Well, of course they don't, because you put them at the bottom and you call it a plant-based burger, right? Like, let's kind of put that same love and attention towards it. And I wanted to mention, if it's okay, this program that we're a part of in New York City. So we do the food for the US Open. And the New York Mayor's office had a plant-powered challenge. So they are encouraging different food operators to commit to reducing their greenhouse gas emissions by 25% by 2030, specifically through shifts towards plant-based menu options. And so we're doing that with the US Open. And a lot of what we're trying to figure out is how far can we get with some of these menu design elements, right? Some of these behavior change elements. And then when do we have to start deploying other tactics around incentives, pricing, guest communication, that kind of thing. And what makes me excited about that initiative, similar to the Billie Eilish tours where we're creating this supportive environment, is we now have a very supportive client, right, who's saying, we're with you in figuring out how to do this, we're with you in figuring out how to kind of push against these cultural headwinds, and that's gonna help us a lot.
And I love that, using the food as a primary reduction of carbon, because again, it's ignored so often. And so many things are also pointing to sort of the name of your organization of greener by default, just making it so it's the easier, most basic choice. And we use that strategy a lot in sustainability throughout the projects. We have just under 15 minutes left, but I would love to stop for a second and see if there are any questions from our lovely, gorgeous crowd. Someone earlier said it was the most attractive crowd they've seen in a long time, so just saying. Go ahead, and Kurt has a microphone for you, so if you wouldn't mind standing up.
Joan, my old marketer.
Yes, hello. Hi, Joan, former AEG and Live Nation, also a recovering vegetarian. Just questions for you all, because I don't think a lot of people realize that plant-based equates to a friendlier environment and climate change support, or aversion, I guess. And you started to touch on it a little bit, Steph, with some of the data and around the impact of going plant-based. This question is for any of the panelists, what are you all doing to educate the fans and the crews and the general public around the why and the impact that they can have in participating in being plant-based?
Well, I mentioned a couple things, which is telling the video before the show that explains to the fans, if you eat just one plant-based meal a day, 30 days, 10,000 people in the arena, 7 million gallons of water. We have stats cards on all the tables. We have facts in the arena at the concessions, which explain we have the tabling with Reverb. We have an eco village at every show where people can come, take the Support and Feed pledge, learn stats about the impact on climate. And just FYI, kind of going to assume everybody in this room knows, but maybe everyone doesn't know, 50% of our habitable land is agriculture, and 75% of that is animal agriculture. And we really have to get our heads around our really inappropriate system of feeding people in the world, not just for climate change, for the fact of just feeding people. We have a planet that is rich in land that could be feeding people, and instead it is feeding animals. And it is feeding animals for a very small amount of food that goes to humans. It's also raising crops like alfalfa and corn that are largely going to China to raise cattle in China. The Colorado River is largely used for alfalfa crops. So we might think of our verdant, beautiful country and all this farmland, and then we have to realize, lots of that beautiful farmland is covered with hog farms or cattle feed, et cetera. So we really have to get our head around it. And I'm going to use a little quote from someone else that at a COP conference, an activist had a tear painted on their face and a big sign, end fossil fuels, with tears on it. And this person said, what about animal agriculture? And she said, I don't think we should tell people what to eat. And this is the problem we're up against. I'm going to get really strong here. People always ask us what gives us hope, and what doesn't give me hope is the fact that even climate conferences serve meat. serve animal products. If you can't get climate scientists and climate philanthropists to eat a scientifically proven climate-friendly diet, we're fucking doomed, people. Let's get real. It's not a good sign. We're in trouble. So, having the stats, but it's not just the stats. We can try with all our might to get the stats, but if we don't make it baked in, if we don't make it easy, if we don't make it convenient, if we don't make it delicious, then we're going to destroy our planet because people don't want to stop tasting something they like. And that's literally where we're at. So, anyway, there you go.
No, I was just going to expand on what Maggie's saying and also just explain to Joan that, Billy and Maggie are leading the charge here, but then it's our responsibility to communicate to the fans through, Live Nation socials, the venue socials. Now that I know Mary, we're going to be talking a lot more because I'm going to bug her about venues. But, we communicate with Support+Feed's team. So the messaging hopefully is getting to everyone, not just on the video before the show, but before they get there, after they leave. I think the next conversation with the venues is, can we keep the stats up about how it's impacting the climate if they choose the balanced burger, Yes, versus, the regular burger. So I think, like Maggie said, it's making it more convenient, putting those products in front of the fans before the other products, how it's presented, does it look appetizing and delicious, and give them that option versus just putting it off to the side like it's the negative option.
One thing I'll just add on the communications question, we're not there yet because we're still seeing some kind of mixed results in terms of the data behind this, but I see a future where we have on-menu climate labeling or on-menu environmental labeling where there's kind of like a stoplight system where it's like, this is a green item, no regrets. And I think what that helps inform is people's own behavior choices, right? Because it isn't just about getting everyone to become a vegan or vegetarian, but also these heavy meat eaters to just eat less of it, right? Yeah. And so maybe they can make the decision then, I know over the course of my week I'm at, my one burger quota that I've decided is appropriate for me, whatever that is. But it helps them with that decision-making process. We are experimenting with that in different places. In some cases, it actually we're seeing data that shows that it's kind of pushing people in the wrong direction. So that's why we're taking a kind of incremental approach to it to just make sure it's having the results we want.
We should talk.
Great. I've got a lot of follow-ups from this panel.
I think and we have another question over here.
The number of conferences I've been to in the last month that were environmental related that served beef was astounding. So music is not my profession, the environment is, and specifically the ocean. I work for Heal the Bay, and I also lead a sustainable aquaculture initiative with Santa Monica College. So I'm going to ask a very specifically narrow question, but I'm just kind of curious. The ocean is one of our biggest tools in combating climate change. So I'm curious if there are any ocean products that you've integrated into your meals, specifically like kelps and seaweeds, and just would love to hear.
I can answer that.
Yeah.
I'll say two things. One is we partner with the Monterey Bay Aquarium Seafood Watch program to try and, I will say as someone whose background is in agriculture, I find seafood sustainability very complicated, right? Because it's about population level sustainability, and so it changes quite rapidly. And so that's why we use Monterey Bay to sort of help make sure that we're following the best science in that regard. But to your point, where are there opportunities to support the health of the ocean with the products that we're purchasing? To be honest, in the sports and entertainment world, we're not doing it yet, but Levy also operates cultural attractions. We have some museums, zoos, and aquariums where we're starting to integrate it. One other thing that I'm excited about, it's not here yet, but Levy in the UK has partnered with NOPLA. If anyone is familiar with that product, they won the Earthshot Prize with Prince William a couple of years ago, and it's an algae-based compostable disposable. So that lining that's often like PLA or corn or plastic, if it's not a compostable option, they're using algae as the base for that. It dramatically lowers the carbon footprint associated with it. It's providing some great jobs associated with sustainable ocean products, and it's home compostable, so it's much more compostable than a lot of or much more easily compostable, I should say, than a lot of the products on the market now. So we're working with them to get US-based manufacturing set up, hopefully this summer. We'll see.
There's a lot of plant-based seafood products I know that are served in our catering, and I think that is a really important subject, and I think we could do a better job of including more ocean organizations because it's so critical to the story. Can I ask one question before?
It's a Q&A, Maggie.
It's a Q&A, sorry. Because one of the things that really, really stresses me out and drives me crazy, and Mary, you're probably the one to answer this, but it's on the suite level at arenas and stadiums. This is, I don't know if any of you ever find yourself in a suite, the massive amount of food waste, and usually it's, of course, if you're talking about food waste, plant-based food is much better there too, right? Because if it's going to be wasted, you want the carbon footprint of that to be much lower. So when you get to food waste, you're still better. And also the way it biodegrades is better, et cetera. So there's a lot of reasons. But the food waste itself and the lack of plant-based food at the suite level and those really hospitality levels is very concerning. So can you address that?
Happy to. Food waste reduction, we've been talking mostly about plant-based options, but as a company, food waste reduction is our top priority. Anything else we do around plant-based or more sustainable options, if it's getting thrown out, we've missed the mark, right? So we have to get our house in order in that regard. Suites and premium spaces is a huge challenge. Just really briefly, we require food donations at all of our locations. We obviously want to try and reduce overproduction in general, but the reason suites and premium options are hard is because once the food has gone out in front of the public, once a member of the public has an opportunity to breathe on it, that's sort of past the point of no return of being donatable. And so when you see those big, we call them chef's tables, that food can't be donated. So our opportunity is on the reduction. And what I was talking about earlier with the beef pieces, we need to maintain that value proposition. And so we're doing two things right now to try and do that, which is just basically playing with the service format. So we have one which we call replenish and refill. So we're putting out communication to our guests that we're going to start out by setting out a little bit less than you might have seen earlier. And our servers are actually, you tell them, we need more of whatever that item is, and they'll bring that out. So we're sort of reducing the overall food that's being put out by just having more communication with the guests and a kind of higher touch moment there. The other thing that does is it's a better service experience, actually, because I hadn't been in a suite until I started working for Levy, but a lot of times what happens is the food is just put out there at the very beginning of the event, and then it sits there kind of like ideally as warm as we can keep it, but over time it no longer becomes a great culinary experience. And so we can actually improve the experience while having a better sustainability option. The other thing that we're doing is just playing with service format. So rather than putting everything out at the beginning of the event, just put out the cold hors d'oeuvres at the beginning. And then somewhere around, let's say it's a basketball game, in the first quarter, right before the game tips off, we're going to bring out the hot items, right? And then we come back later with the dessert items. And again, that creates that higher touch environment, but it also just means that we get to engage more with the guests about how much food they actually need, so we can hold more back. And what that allows us to do is either reuse it in a subsequent event, or at the very least, make sure that it's getting to our community members in need and doesn't just end up getting composted.
And I keep hearing this theme of sustainability making a better event and a better experience for everyone attending the event. And I think that's a fantastic note to really emphasize, is that if you're using reusables, if you're not using plastic, it just feels higher end automatically. So it is really a win-win for people who are passionate about sustainability and people who don't pay attention to it. I also want to shout out Musically Fed, who are a great partner to many tours, music events, and entities throughout the US and Europe. We've worked with them to donate food after from catering backstage, and the logistics and insurance pieces and regulations around all of that are huge, and they're a fantastic partner, so worth checking Musically Fed out as well. We have 1 minute left. Do you want to give just anyone have something that they didn't share that they really need to say? Or do we have one last question? Okay, a quick question is perfect.
Yeah, it's more so targeted towards Mary. Are you seeing an uptick in farmers really transitioning to regenerative agriculture just because soil is such a major carbon sink? Like, are you seeing that transition?
It's really interesting. Before I joined Levy, I spent time facilitating a collaboration all about how we accelerate the transition to regenerative agriculture. I think the short answer is yes, we are seeing the moves in that direction. We, in our role, Levy is owned by Compass Group, which is the world's largest food service provider, and so we have a lot of pull with suppliers to then talk to their suppliers and ultimately get to the farmers whose behavior we need to shift. I think the important part of that is, though, it's incumbent upon us and all actors in the system to provide the incentives for them to make those changes. Transitioning to regenerative agriculture costs money. They're not being sustainable because they don't want to. It's just that we haven't provided the incentives for them to do so, right? The market's pulled them towards profit rather than sustainability. And so we just have to think about how we provide those incentives rather than just sort of saying to the farmers, adopt no-till agriculture, figure out how you're going to pay for it.
It's a fascinating, oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I have to jump in on this one because regenerative agriculture, when you're talking about crops that are fed to humans, is a different subject than when you're talking about cattle because the science is not with it on cattle. Soil can only sequester X amount of carbon, and then it is no longer efficient. So transitioning to regenerative agriculture in cattle is not a long-term solution.
Thank you. And
Grass-fed beef, there's just a study that came out that actually has a higher per pound carbon footprint.
So we have to be really clear, and I would love it if people would spread that word because let's keep regenerative agriculture when it comes to human food separate from the cattle conversation because unfortunately it is deflecting a lot. It is another movement by the cattle industry to deflect from the actual strategy, which is eating less meat.
it's a fascinating intersection of climate science, social psychology, activism, and a lot of passion on this stage. Thank you all for your time, and thank you all for being here.